Hello and welcome to Todd Talk, where insight meets inspiration. I'm your host, Todd Hiller, and I'm an author, speaker, and longtime community leader, here to guide you on a journey towards fulfillment and balance. In every episode, we'll explore ways to fill life's emptiness, helping you uncover practical tools to create harmony, purpose, and happiness. Whether it's thriving in your career, nurturing personal growth, or simply finding joy in the everyday, Todd Talk is your space for real conversations and actionable advice. So let's thrive together, personally, professionally, and beyond. This is Todd Talk, and I'm thrilled to have you here. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Todd Talk. I'm very happy and excited today to introduce you to a very good friend of mine and our first official guest on the podcast, not just listening to me ramble on anymore. You get to hear somebody else for a change. This is today we're going to talk to my friend John Parenteau. And so John was born in California, moved to Oregon where he was born and raised, and then he's been back to California. He's been to Connecticut. He's been to Massachusetts. He's been all over. And I met him first when he moved to our tiny town in the northwest corner of Connecticut. And he and his wife lived close by and were members of our volunteer fire department. And in the time that I got to know him, not only did I realize he was a great firefighter, but also that he has done so many things and truly an inspiration to me, from a fellow author to driving race cars to being a cinematographer and literally making movies and winning awards and everything in between. So I know you guys have heard me drone on a lot about encouraging you all to do the things you want to do and pursue the things you love. And the fact that you can be so many things in the course of your lifetime, you are so abundant and have so many talents buried deep down inside of you, some of which you have never even tapped into yet. And so I wanted to talk to John because he is such an amazing example of how you have the ability to do boatloads of things, even on top of your quote unquote day job that is the one you keep to pay the bills. So, John, thank you so much for being here. Why don't you start off and tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll go from there.
Hi, everybody. It's good to be here. Todd makes me sound really good. I wasn't a great firefighter. I was a learning firefighter under Todd's instruction, but I was really enjoying it at the time. But we'll get to that in a second. I grew up in Oregon, in the middle of the forest, and was the typical march, probably like your childhood, Todd. Running through the forest, and when we were young, it was a little less like, tracking you, but rather just get back before dark sometime. And that's kind of the world that I lived in. But, I always had a passion for telling stories, first of all, and the visual arts. So that kind of developed in a rudimentary fashion. Then I wrote short stories for my high school creative newspaper kind of thing, and just kind of pursued that stuff. So when I was in my senior year, or just before senior year, I had to decide what I wanted to do, essentially. So I sat at a desk in school and had an application for the Air Force Academy in front of me and an application for film school. And I looked at both and I said, I can always make films about flying. So I think I'll go to film school. So that was kind of that. But I was really kind of ignorant about the whole process. Again, my small town in Oregon was, I think at the time, 6,000 people, which is very small. And nobody knew anything. When I asked my guidance counselor how I want to go to film school, how do I do that? And he had no idea how to advise me. So I actually wrote to George Lucas because I was a big Star Wars fan. I saw Star Wars in 7th grade, and that's what kind of made me fall in love with film. And so I wrote to George Lucas, and his assistant wrote me back and said, well, you should go to USC Film School because that's where George went. And I said, great, okay. And I applied to one school, and I didn't realize it was probably the most difficult school to get into, particularly film-wise, but it was a private school. It was super expensive. I was not a wealthy child or family at all. So I just, okay, well, I'm going to do it. But I managed to get in, and that kind of launched my career in film. But I think the big thing about that moment and those moments early on was I don't know where I got it from, whether it's my mom or whatever, but I didn't really kind of see things as roadblocks. I kind of saw things as challenges, but interesting things to try to achieve. And so that kind of started this whole life of, oh, I want to do this over here and I'll do that. And I always kept a good job. And some of the things I was doing that I was passionate about were actually career related stuff. Some were just kind of really expensive hobbies at times. But it always was never having the thought that I can't do something. And like I said, I have no idea where I got that from.
Yeah, well, and that's huge. So in drawing, the first thing out of that just comes to mind, like it hit me, like a ton of bricks, is so many of us, I think, are our own worst enemies, and we get in our way and we think, oh, we can't do that because like we don't, it won't work out. We talk ourselves out of it before we start, but you were like, oh, I'm good. I'm going to apply to this really amazing school. And, so the first lesson, you never know until you try. The answer might be no, but the answer might also be yes, sure. Come on in. And the other thing that was so wild about that is that, so George Lucas is obviously a huge name in film. And like you said, when you looked at it, you thought, well, I'll just do it. Like, I'll just apply there and go there. And I think it talks a lot about, or it speaks a lot to how much our mindset really, really drives us to do things we might not do otherwise. So you can kick the dirt in front of you and say, well, that's the school George Lucas went to. Little old me is never going to get in there. Or you can say, hey, these people said I should apply here because it's a really great school. So that's what I'm going to do. And even that little bit of, the change in your mindset to say, oh, it will probably work out. Like, why wouldn't it? I think will drive, well, obviously it drove success because, that's where you went and you were, successfully pursuing that as a career. So yeah, I love that. So so no Air Force, obviously. So you went to school, 4 years, regular 4-year program in the school?
Yeah. 4-year college. Yeah. Undergraduate degree.
All right. So what does film school look like from beginning to end? Obviously there's a lot of learning at the end. Do you have to make your own movie? Do you have to prove that you can use a camera? What do you do?
Yeah. I mean, you start really most programs, I think in college, most degree programs are really the last 2 years, the junior and senior year. You don't do a lot. You're always taking your minimum requirements and such in the first 2 years. I was never happy with that. So I tried to take every film course that was available to me outside of the degree program. And, so I have stories about that too, but actually George Lucas story. So I took one course that was just sort of a general filmmaking course. And, towards the end of it, everybody wrote a little treatment, a little short outline of a short story script that we wanted to do. And the class voted on the one we would all make together. And they voted for mine. And so I got to be the director, first time ever directing anything. I quickly realized two things. Number one, I really loved shooting and moving the camera and lighting and figuring out how to tell the story with the camera. And the other thing I realized is that I had no idea what to tell actors. It's I had no experience in that. I didn't understand how am I supposed to direct the actor. I didn't know. So it terrified me. So that's pretty much when I made my transition into more of a cinematographer at the time than anything else. But the other funny thing was that my instructor, who is now a dear friend of mine, walked by, it was on a Saturday, and walked by kind of early in the morning and to check the set and said, hey, how long are you guys going to be here? And I said, oh, I don't know. I think we're scheduled till 3:00. And so we went about the day. He left, and about 2:00 we wrapped. We got done, finishing production. And so we all left. And the next week in class, he came up to me and just shaking his head and said, where were you? And I said, what do you mean? We got done early. That's a good thing. We're supposed to be efficient and get things done. He goes, I brought George Lucas by to meet you and see your production.
Oh, God.
And I'm like, oh, because at that time he was totally my hero and obviously got me into film school or got me directed in that direction. So that was, a lesson learned. Now, I don't know what lesson I learned out of that, other than I missed a great opportunity. But the rest of film school was that kind of just, I'm a kind of guy who just gets involved. I mean, you know that from the fire department. I didn't just join and sit back. I said, okay, what can I do? What's next? And I think film school was similar. I needed a job on campus, sort of a work study kind of thing. And there was an opening for an assistant operations manager at the film school. And so basically it gave me keys to everything. And so I was sneaking cameras out on the weekends to shoot little projects or music videos for people. I was just very involved. I was like the boss, the student boss of the film school in terms of the gear and the facilities. And that's just kind of how I am. I mean, every process has been okay, well, somebody needs to take charge. I'm not going to be a jerk about it, but I'm going to do it. Why not? Why you go back to that comment you made, which is, I mean, it's not like everything's always worked out, but what does it hurt to have the attitude of, well, I'm going to try that, and I'm going to try a bunch of different things. And if I can't get it done, okay, but at least I tried, but hopefully things work out. And that's kind of what film school was and everything beyond.
Yeah, and there's a quote I love about that is, what if everybody always says, well, what if it doesn't work out? But what if it does? And even more so, what if it goes better than you ever dreamed? Now, so, okay, one quick question first. Did you ever get to meet George Lucas?
I did. The funny thing is that Spielberg became my kind of hero or whatever. I switched over to Steven because I really respected his directing and filmmaking ability. Not that I didn't respect George Lucas, but Steven was a little bit more my thing. And then I eventually worked for Steven Spielberg. So I got to know him personally, which was really awesome. And I met George through him, and it was cool. But at that point, I'd already been like, oh, yeah, but Steven Spielberg is even cooler. So it was nice, but it would have blown me away in film school. But, by the time I met him, it was less. Yeah.
I like that you say Steven, too, like he's just your neighbor that you have coffee with a few times a month, like he's not actually Steven Spielberg. So, well, I'm glad you got to meet George Lucas and become a big Spielberg fan. So, but and this is not that I'm minimizing your small town where you grew up, but like if anybody listening right now has ever worried like, oh, I can't do that because I think a lot of what we get wrapped up into sometimes also is that we think that our past or maybe where we're born or like the life that we start when we're little kids, whether it's our town, socioeconomic status, whatever it is, I think a lot of that follows us around for a long time. So you are literally a small town kid from Oregon who, ran around in the sticks of a small town, and you are someone who calls Steven Spielberg by first name. And so I'm not to minimize everything in the middle, but like I want to pull the lesson for all the listeners out of that you never, ever should label yourself any way, shape, or form except by the things you want to achieve. Like don't label yourself and drag yourself down as, oh, I'm a small town kid, or I'm an inner city kid, or I hate math, or I can't, I'm not good at science, whatever it is, we give ourselves all these labels and all these things that kind of hold us back and box us into one thing. And really there's a great deal of productivity that can come out of the mindset of just, you know what, let's do it. I bet it'll work out. And to your point about the fire department, one of the leadership things that I've always been a big fan of is that you don't have to make the perfect decision. You just need to make a decision, and then you can work with it and walk forward. So like you said, if no one else is going to do it, no one's going to be the student boss in film school. Like, hey, I'll do it, and I'll be polite about it, nice about it, but someone has to give it some direction. And what better way to take it the direction you want it to go than to be the one who says, yep, sure, I will do it. And I'll go ahead and take care of it.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I grew up, my mom, I was raised by a single mom, who was a registered nurse that basically just took like pay cuts to be able to work closer to home and be close to us and take care of us. We had no money. I mean, we were lower middle class, I'd say maybe, or even a little bit lower than that. But, it was about, I think her idea, she's half Chinese and she grew up in Manila, the Philippines. And I think she always just took a chance at things, I think her parents made her do it, but from my perspective, it was like, well, it doesn't matter where you come from. It's more about who you are as a person, how you represent yourself to the public and the people around you, and what is your passion. Follow your passions, whether it be a hobby passion or a career passion. It doesn't cost you anything to try. And, like you said, you have to try, because if you don't try, then you're always going to say, what if?
Right. Yep. Yeah. If you don't ask, the answer will always be no. And if you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, and that same mantra. So, all right. So day job wise, and on that note of passion, you've always had a day job kind of in the film industry. Yeah. That's sort of always been your bread and butter, but it is now. Let me rescind that. I know it is now, but in talking to you and learning about you and your wife, I know that you have also done things like start businesses based on a good idea, and worked in all different areas. So talk about that a little bit. Like we all have a day job, and I think everybody listening is like, okay, I can't give up on the bills. Like I don't want to pay them, but that's one of those things. I always say, do what you love and never apologize, and do what you want to do. And people say, well, I don't want to pay my bills. Well, too bad you have to. But so talk about the things that have also kept you busy in addition to being a filmmaker?
I mean, you're taught early on in film, particularly, that, it's always about the next project that you're trying to develop and the things you're going. So I kind of took that into life and realized that I always want an A, B, and C job. And I call them jobs. Not all of them were jobs, but the A job was what paid the bills, and I had to put some focus on that. The B job was really kind of what I wanted to do different, or what I had a great idea about, like you mentioned. And then the C job was often a really cool hobby but I was really passionate about and I was going to put time into. So I'd always keep a focus on doing things that I loved. And it's funny because when I turned 50, I was kind of bummed. And I was like, oh, I never got to direct a feature film, and I never did a studio thing, feature. And then I kind of realized after a moment that I have a lot of friends from film school who basically, they never did anything in film. They ended up switching careers, going to work for their parents or going into other industries. I'm one of the, not few people, but I'm one of the few people in my world that I'm aware of that actually stayed gamefully employed in entertainment in some way or another my entire career. And yes, it's not doing exactly what I wanted to do in terms of that, but that's what the B and C stuff is for, to always push for that, to try to do new things. But I realized I needed to be happy about who I'd become and how I'd achieved, being able to work in the industry I wanted to work in, for my entire life, really. So I think that's the thing, is that my wife and I had always tried different things. We started doing production with a side production company. We starting a trade school for film, which then COVID hit and that kind of messed that up. So we might revisit that one. But a lot of people, I have a friend who just started his own company in another field, and it was daunting to him. I'm going to go open a business. And I didn't want to say that it's not, you can go do it. You can just do it online. It's like $50 to start a business, and yeah, there's responsibilities involved with that, but you can't be overwhelmed by those things. You can't just panic that the details, the minutia is going to be a problem. That's just the stuff. How do you eat an elephant? You one bite at a time. So just take it slowly and figure out what we need to do, but never be stopped. And that's kind of always how we've been, and I've been keeping multiple things going. So I'm always inspired in some way or another.
Yeah, very cool. And, I think so the famous Nike slogan of "Just Do It," in my mind, it has always been more about like that slogan to me has always been about the just, not about the do it. Because like we never think that we can just do it. Like just do it, whether you're tired or worried or nervous or scared, then just do it that way. Like you said, I want to start a business. Okay, then just start one. Well, what if it fails and after a year it's no longer a business? Well, then you said I started a business one time and learned it wasn't a great idea or it wasn't for me, and you could move on. And I think a lot of the outreach folks I get from social media who, we kind of chat about different things. One of the things that I get reoccurring from people is that like, well, I don't know if I can. And I'm like, a lot of what I give them back is, well, you can, you absolutely can. That's like when the teacher, you're in elementary school and you say, can I go to the bathroom? The teacher says, I don't know. Can you? May I? So, yes, you can. You can do lots of stuff, whether it's starting a business, changing careers, even late in life. You mentioned turning 50 and like, oh, well, I'm kind of bummed because I never got to do X, Y, and Z. But so one of my other episodes is about comparison. And in that, I kind of walk through like, it's comparison is the thief of joy. So we compare ourselves a lot to other people, but somewhere there are a whole boatload of people who are looking at you or the specific person, and saying, wow, I wish I had what they had, or I wish I, did what they did, or I wish I had accomplished what they had accomplished. And I think a lot of times we never put that focus back on ourselves to say, hey, I'm not doing half bad. Are there things I want to change and dreams I have and goals? Absolutely. But if you just start them and work through them, like, they don't have to go perfectly the first time around or the second or the third. You have a lot of time to get things right. So film school, you're also an author. I know that you've published a book about one of the things that my son thinks it's amazing that you have written a book about driving race cars.
Yeah, that was another weird thing. I was working at Amblin Entertainment, one of my first, again, the weird stuff with me, I'll backpedal slightly. I was shooting as a cinematographer professionally. I went over to his house, and he had this 3D animation package, this computer, and these 3D floating, objects. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing how you do that. And this is like, we're talking the late 80s. So it's like not when 3D animation was even around much. And he said, oh, it's this computer. And I said, oh, I'd love to learn that. It sounds really cool. And he goes, well, I have to go to China to shoot a project. If you would take care of my cat, you can, spend all your time here and learn. And I was a freelance artist at the time, so I had time in between stressing about my next job. But so flash forward, I learned that software. I got hired at Amblin Entertainment. I'm skipping a bunch of interesting things probably, but what were we talking about now? I just forgot.
Driving race cars.
Oh yeah. So
a
buddy of mine, one of the guys who worked for me at at Amblin, I was like, oh, I love racing, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, you should go to racing school. I'm like, there's a thing called racing school? And he goes, oh yeah, I went to it.
Did you email Mario Andretti and say, hey, where should I go to racing school?
No, this guy just told me, and he's actually a big time visual effects supervisor now. But he just said you should go to racing school. So I went to racing school, and that became sort of my B thing. So I got promoted at Amblin. I was running this division for this visual effects division for them. And so I was very young and had a lot of money that I was too stupid to save. And I said, I'm going to go racing. And so I went to racing school, and I started racing in series and things like that. And I just loved it. I loved the concept of controlling a vehicle at its limits and such. But I went through that. I raced a bunch of other things. And then at one point I was asked if I would teach, and I started doing that. And I love that concept. So I wrote a book about it, but we can probably cut all of this out, because the point is that, yes, I wrote a racing book, and it was a lot of fun because of all that experience I had racing before, but I like writing. So to me, I'd like to write anything. So anything I can work on would be great. So the first thing I thought on my own, I'm going to write a book on this kind of racing, dynamics of racing. And then after that, I finished that, and I'm like, oh, that was cool. I've written all these screenplays, these feature film screenplays that have never gone anywhere, which is part of that. You try and nothing necessarily happens, but hey, I have this thing I made. And I thought, I'm going to convert some of them to novels. And so that's kind of where I am now, is changing some of my screenplays into novels, which is a new challenge. And I've never written a novel before. So that's what I'm doing. But yeah, I love writing. And again, it's another one of those things that, well, why not? I had a friend a few years ago say, hey, I've got financing for some children's films set in Hawaii. He said, if you want to write one, I can try to get it made. And I had like 6 months or something to do it. And I said, okay. And so I sat down and said, how would I write? So I wrote this whole thing called My Secret Zoo. Yeah, so it's still in pre-production, so I don't know I'm assuming it'll get made eventually. But I mean, I just try to just do things because I find them interesting. And I didn't answer that question very well, so I rambled.
You answered it perfectly. So lots of things to pull out. First of all, when you get to go to Hawaii, I would like to come with you as your longtime friend when it debuts. I would like the extra ticket. Okay. I will barter with your lovely wife somehow to get the plane seat next to you. But so no, we're not going to cut any of that, because the amazing part about all of that is so wrapped in the story of how you got to write the book was the fact that you also just said, I'm going to go to racing school. And one more instance of, you don't need to say one thing. I've met, and this might be generational, and I'm not picking on like my parents' generation, but I think that generation, the baby boomers, or my parents' generation-ish, their view of life after school was, you go find some place to get a job that will gainfully employ you, treat you reasonably well, where you can stay for 30 years. It's relatively close to home. You sort of like what you do, at least maybe more than a little bit. And then when that time's over, then you're done, and you leave, and then you go, you fish in your spare time or whatever you want to do. And I think nothing against my parents' generation, but one of the things that has always amazed me about that is like the outliers who were like, yeah, that's not for me. And that's where those success stories pop up. You see people like, Colonel Sanders decided he started KFC when he was like, already late in life. And all these people who started later than a lot of younger people, but at least they still started. And so everybody too, I think we're in this magical race, like, oh, it's too late. Like I can't do it. But prime example, like your friend that started a business. So I'm going to start a business. Go ahead. And I think sometimes we forget, like, even if you're past the 17-year-old mentality, sometimes we forget like how young we truly are. Heard a great thing the other day by Gary Vee that said, like, he was talking to some guy who was 40. He's like, do you realize you have another 40 or 50 years to keep doing things in your life? He's like, this is not over, like no midlife crisis.
I actually I wrote a note down about that because I said, if you were to start at 18 years old and try a new career every 5 years until retirement, you would go through 10 different careers. You can do 10 different things. 5 years is a long time. What were most of us doing 5 years ago? Something probably different. So you're already doing it. So just don't be so daunted by the idea of trying something new. I mean, protect your family. That's a smart thing to do. Don't waste money that you need to survive, but take your chance. Use that little extra weekend or evening hours to pursue something that you find passionate. I think that's the other issue with the older generations. I don't think there was much onus on doing a job that you love. It was on
for sure. Yeah, no.
Getting a job, like you said, like get a job, maybe don't hate it. That was probably the criteria, and support your family. And then when you've done it for a number of years, you can retire and then go do something else that you want to do. I don't have that approach to life, and I hope a lot of people don't. First of all, I try to do a job that I really enjoy, and granted, not everything I do, even though I'm in the film industry, is fun. It's stressful and a bad experience, but it's still in the world that I want to do. But in the meantime, I'm still pursuing other things that I love and that inspire me to keep me moving forward. And I hope that, I always thought, actually, when I moved to Connecticut, I thought, oh, one day I'll retire, and I think I pretty quickly realized that I'm a filmmaker. I probably will never retire because I love being in the industry. So it makes it difficult to imagine that kind of thing. I won't me going fishing or sitting in a rocking chair sounds really boring to me. When and if I retire, I will, make a film. Or I guess the big question is, if you won the lottery today, what would you do with that money? And
yep.
I would make a film, I would do things like that. Whereas that's the question for everybody else. Find that thing that's passionate and pursue that, even if it's not your A job and it's your B or C job.
Yep. Yeah. One of the things, so we talk about things that you started that didn't necessarily take off or not yet. So one of the things I've developed is a speaking program for students and young adults called No Box Big Enough, about not boxing yourself into one thing for the rest of your life. And, it's one of those things that sits quietly on my laptop in a corner. But, one of the things is I have, when I published my novel, somebody said to me, a former teacher of mine was like, my God, like how on earth did you have time to write a book? Like, but all the stuff that you do, like when on earth did you sit down and write? And, when you find those things that you really like to do, you will find time to do them. Like you said, those quiet weekends or the evenings, a lot of time left over. And I think that the things that we love the most and we want to pursue are the things that we will find the time to do no matter what it looks like. I really wanted to say that I had published a book and keep working on it. So I would get up at 4:00 in the morning and spend 2 hours hammering away at my computer until anybody else in the house got up, and then, go about my day. And sometimes at night until 11 or 12 o'clock at night, when I was like, this is a really dumb idea because you're getting up at 4:00 tomorrow morning to do the same thing. But I have found that the number of things that, like you said, the older generation, they found a job that they, didn't hate necessarily. The things we do now, and I think the things that we focus on the most, they don't have to be, if you're an employer listening to this, please don't get mad at me. I don't mean people should not do their job well. But there's a beautiful quote by Jim Rohn that I love so much that says, learn to work harder on yourself than you do on your job. And it has always resonated so much with me because, like, I like my job. I'm very happy where I work. I like my employer. I like my boss. But, there are other things that, like you said, if you won the lottery, what would you do tomorrow? And that question is something that's in that No Box Big Enough program for kids to try to really get them to pull out what they want to do with their life and what they want to spend their time on. I think the younger generation, we give this really unfair question at 17 and say, hey, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? And they go, I have no idea. I'm 17. I don't even know what I want to do next weekend. So if you won the lottery and all your bills were taken care of, what would you do? What would you spend your time on? And be brutally honest about it. Some people, I would play video games. Okay, awesome. There are people who make money, now testing video games, designing video games, playing them. My son watches a YouTube channel of some other person playing Minecraft. And I'm like, you could just go play Minecraft yourself. But he's like, no, it's not as much fun. But so I think all the things that you've done, the A, B, and C job is such a beautiful example of, listen, don't just stick to, I have to use my time on my day job to pay my bills. And this is how I'm going to Eeyore the rest of my life through until I have to either retire or die.
Yeah, I mean, I would also take it to the point that if you're doing a job that you don't love, either make a choice to try to do a really good job and promote yourself through or get opportunities in the same world that allows you to enjoy it a little bit more, or just start looking for that other thing that really inspires you so you can maybe segue. If you don't try that BC job, it won't one day potentially be that thing you can switch to. Oh, I'm going to quit the job that I don't love, but move to this thing that I really do love. But until you explore those B and C things, you're always going to be stuck in that A job. So, I think the biggest thing I have a problem with is people who are, who take a job and they just hate it, and they hate it. Like customer service. It's like customer service is free. So if you're a server and you have a bad attitude, that's not doing you any good. If you have a server and you make an effort to put a smile on your face when you greet people, you're probably going to get better tips. Hey, you just advanced yourself. So always take that positive approach to what you're doing. And if you don't love it, work on another opportunity on the side. And I do the same thing. I get up at 5 a.m, and which I never used to do. And I write for at least an hour. And then I fit in other things during the day. That's the best you can do. And I think if you don't make an effort to do that, then it's never going to come to fruition. That's really simple as that.
Right. And, small steps matter so much. People a lot of times to criticize themselves. They say, I didn't do well enough, or I didn't achieve this one great thing. So I encourage people too to look at, don't set goals, set targets. Because if you don't achieve the goal, when you try, you say, I failed, and it brings about that failure mindset mentality. But if you say, well, this is my target, the very dead center of the target is exactly where I want to be. But the entire rest of the target still counts. If you hit somewhere else on there, you're still closer to what you want to do. So we never give ourselves enough credit, I don't think, for the small steps, the small wins, the small increments. Like you said, a server who is positive and, greets the people at their table with a smile on their face. Eventually, all of a sudden, 6 months on the road, they find themselves as a hostess or as the lead server, whatever it is, or they say, hey, come manage the front of house for us because you're just such a great people person. We look at it and say, well, I'm still just a server, or I'm still in food service. But in the grand scheme of things, there are probably 4 different advancements you have made just by having the right attitude. And I think so many other things are like that. And there's no better way to take really consistent steps than realizing that the little ones still count. You said, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? How do you run a marathon? One step at a time. You can't start it and just, take one giant step and end up at the finish line 26 miles later. You have to take little steps the entire way and be persistent and just remember that those count. It's not a jump from the bottom to the top. It's a slow climb to where you want to get to.
And I like your example about just, you're not always hitting one exact target. I mean, I went to film school and wanted to be a filmmaker. Did I know what that meant in high school? Probably not at all. The general idea. But I discovered, as I mentioned, I like cinematography. So maybe I'll focus more on cinematography in college, which is what I did. And then I graduated and I was shooting projects for people. And then my buddy said, hey, you should learn this 3D animation thing. And I did that. And I was like, wow, I'm a cinematographer in the computer. That's kind of cool. A year or two later, I, by happenstance, got hired at Amblin Entertainment. So now I'm an animator animating shots for a TV show, which who knew that was coming? But it was really cool because I get to move the camera. All those things I love about cinematography were in the computer. And then I realized there was opportunities there. Nobody had really done that kind of project before in the world, except for a couple big feature films. And so nobody understood what it meant to actually move through the process. So I would be getting ready to do a new shot and I couldn't find this model, this 3D model I needed. So I'd go to the modeler and say, oh, did you finish that? And they said, oh yeah, I just finished that. I said, okay, well, I'll tell the texture artist, the person who has to do the coloring on it, next time you finish a model, let me know. And I did the texture artist and et cetera, et cetera. And 6 months went by and they fired the boss and they asked everybody else, because I was the youngest, newest employee, they asked everybody else who should run this division. And they said, well, John's already doing it. Just let him do it. So they called me in and they promoted me to vice president, general manager from the lowest animator to that. And it's only because I just looked for opportunities. And was I now a feature filmmaker or whatever I thought I was going to be in high school? No. I was doing something completely different. But you know what? I was working on a lot at Universal. I was meeting cool people. Steven Spielberg became my boss then. Awesome as that. So, that's the things constantly evolve, but you have to be open to that change. I have a target. Yes, I would love to one day direct a feature film, but that target, the path to that target takes many interesting paths and turns and such. So it's a great thing to be open to. Always be open to the different changes that can happen through your life and not get so caught up on that one single little target, because ultimately you're still going to have a lot of fun and do some really cool things as you go through that path.
Yeah, for sure. And, the hard part about, well, not specifically to kids, but our younger generation and even older generation, I think a lot of times we lose sight of the fact that we can do a lot of good and progress a lot, whether it's professionally or personally, if we just remember to kind of pull up your bootstraps and try a little bit. Like you said, you went and you made things work and made things happen and got the texture model. But I think if you're a parent listening, please encourage your kids to do this. And if you're a parent or just an adult, I encourage you to do this too. Don't lose sight of the fact that nowadays, and I'm not picking on any particular generation, but nowadays a little bit of work ethic and focus goes a long way. If you are willing to do the things nobody else either thinks to do or wants to do, there is so much, well, this is double-sided. There's a lot of pleasure that can be drawn out of doing things and making things work the way they're supposed to, because no one else will step up and do it. And there's also a lot of recognition that comes. When I first started working for the DOT, so I grew up the son of a farmer / carpenter foreman. And if you've never worked for your father, it's not very easy. Just ask Jesus, but my dad expected a lot of me, and my dad is my best friend. But growing up, like, there was no such thing as not working hard. Like, everything we did with a purpose. We did for a reason. We worked hard. We didn't quit halfway through just because we thought, oh, that's good enough, or, oh, the day's kind of over. And I very quickly learned that not every person my age is like that. So when I first started working for the place that I still work now in a different division, like, I was the one that all the older guys were like, you got nothing to prove, kids, slow down. Like, you don't have to do that. And I'm like, yeah, but it's not in me to, like, just not do it because no one told me to. If there's something that needs to be done, just do it. If there's something that needs to be taken care of, go ahead and do it. And chances are someone, and typically someone higher up, will notice that you are the one who has taken the initiative to do that. So I try to encourage every young member, like the fire department, the students at the fire school where I teach, they're all ages from, you took fire one recently all the way down to 17-year-old kids. I try to encourage everybody, like, listen, just go ahead and do it and take the initiative to do it without being asked, because that will push you a lot further than you think. And I think your example about going from, lowly animator all the way up to, to as high as you did was a great example of that.
Yeah. I think that the idea of being on it is always something that I love. It's like, I've gotten every benefit in life, work-wise particularly, by being on it. And that just means listening, paying attention, and being eager to do more. So I'm the same with you. I've had people say, what are you trying to do? Slow down. You're making us look bad. I'm like, hey, sorry, then you need to pick it up, because I don't want to be a jerk about it. And I wouldn't say those things to them, but that's my attitude, is like, just get it, move it forward. And if nobody else is going to take responsibility for that, I'm going to do that. And that's how that Amblin, that visual effects job was a perfect example. I had no idea what I was doing, but by trying to be helpful and trying to make the process work smoother, I didn't realize that I was basically putting myself in a position as a producer. And nobody knew what that was at the time, and neither did I, but I just took responsibility because nobody else was doing it and didn't step on toes, but really put in the energy, and it rewarded me, and it continues to reward me, time and time again. That's when I was with the fire department. I mean, I went to fire school, and I was the oldest guy there. I was 58 when I went to fire school, and everybody else was like 20 or 17. And it was very hard because I was much older, but nonetheless, nobody was really taking charge there either. So I sort of just in a friendly way kind of started taking charge. And next thing I know, they all voted me platoon leader. So, and I didn't really mean to do that. And but it's just my personality of go do it, be kind about it, be supportive. But if nobody else is going to do it, then I'm going to do it.
Yep. And we're going to talk John up one more. I'm going to wrap up because I really like this thought to wrap up on and pulled out of what he just said, but I'm also going to toot his horn for him real quick. So as the deputy chief of the fire department, I call anytime we have a member at the fire school in any program, and I say, how are my folks doing? And so the lead instructor of the program said to me, well, not only does John have the platoon leader spot, and not only is he doing great with the class work in terms of his class, but he literally has the highest average of anyone ever that has attended the fire school since we started keeping records when we opened the doors in the 1950s. So I said, all right, so you're telling me I should push him to do a little bit better. All right, I got it. I'll make him work a little harder.
The funny thing about that is that it sounds really good, and I'm really excited that I had that. But you know what it was is I hadn't been to school in so many years. I hadn't taken any sort of classes, so I was paranoid, and I just studied the heck out of it, not really remembering what I need to do, just to make sure that I wasn't failing. But it ended up being good. So.
Yeah, well, it worked out. So, and what I want to end on and wrap up on, and when John was just talking now about the, kind of pick it up and do the things that need to be done, whether or not someone else is going to do it. I want you, everybody listening, to never lose sight of the fact that you have the most front row seat to knowing what you want out of your own life. You can say that, oh, I think my spouse wants to do X, or I think my brother would love to do Y, but those are just guesses. You know what you want out of life. You have a front row seat. You know exactly the things you want. You know how big or small you want them. You know where you want to travel, what you want to do for work, what you would like to make for a dream income, what you want your house to look like. You literally have a front row, unobstructed view to what you think your life could be and what you want it to be. And one of the best ways to get there is to realize that you are in the driver's seat. You are in control of your own actions. No one else is going to do the hard thing for you. Just like sometimes in a group, you need to be the one to pick up the slack and say, oh, I'm going to do this one task because no one else is. In your own life, you have to do that for yourself, because nobody's coming to rescue you and say, hey, I'm going to make, nobody's out there saying, I'm going to make Todd Hiller's life everything he wants it to be, because that's not their job. That's our jobs as people. So take a really close look at the things you love and what you want to do, and realize how impactful your decisions are. That's something I wish someone told me years ago when I was younger. Coming out of high school, I kind of just, I drifted where my boat went, and I kind of dealt with whatever showed up when it got somewhere where, it stopped or got into port. I never realized that I could actually steer it different directions and bring it to places I wanted to go. I have figured that out now, thankfully, that I'm a bit older. Wish I figured it out sooner. But yeah, some beautiful lessons with John today, and I thank you so much for coming to talk, and give us your final thoughts as we wrap up. I want to end with you, not me, because they hear me talk all the time.
I'll say this to both young and folk and older folk, but it's okay if you don't know what you want to do now, but put the effort into thinking about it. Spend time. If you come out of high school and you have that question, which you mentioned, what do you want to do for the rest of your life? Don't worry about that, but what do you want to do soon? What's your thing? And if you can't answer what your thing is, spend some time thinking about it. But you'll have opportunity. But just make sure you're making that effort and push in that direction of understanding where you want to go in your life, at least in the next few years. And then take that, go through those next few years, and then maybe do some course correction. But that's fine. As long as you're working towards that goal, that's what's most important.
Love it. Love it. All right. As always, everybody, thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to tune in, subscribe, and like, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in to Todd Talk. If you've liked what you've heard, please go ahead and subscribe and follow along so you don't miss any updates or new episodes. Thanks very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.